I'm excited as we begin a new series this morning called Tend. This series is going to be simply about allowing God to tend to our souls, of making space for Him to have access, to prune, to water, to tend to the soil of our souls. And this is based in John chapter 15. We're just going to read the first two verses as we begin. It says this, it says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. In this passage we see, right, that Jesus is the vine, and God is the gardener. We are the branches. So we have the potential, right, as branches to break off, to run wild, to overgrow, to decay. We also have the potential to produce a healthy fruit, to be alive. But we must allow the gardener to tend to the soil of our soul, to tend, to prune, to water, to break up ground that has become difficult or hard. I love it. There's a quote by Gary Thomas that says this, if we tend our garden, we'll have plenty of food with which to feed others. If we give our garden just cursory attention, we may have enough food to feed just ourselves. If we completely neglect our garden, we're going to be so hungry, we'll become consumer Christians feeding off of others. And so my hope is that through this series, we discuss and walk through ways in which we can allow the gardener to tend to our souls, so that we can produce a fruit that not only feeds us, but feeds others and is beneficial instead of having to consume or feed off of others. That we begin, if we're not or if we are, whatever season we're in, cultivating fruit that nourishes us. Instead of just going to the supermarket on Sundays and buying some stuff that's produced, a form that's not natural or created within us in the depths of the soil of our soul, where we can begin to feed others out of the overflowing. Gary Thomas also talks about how Puritans called the Sabbath the market day of the soul, a special day to care for our inner world and to spend extra time relating to our God. The problem is that some of us try to take a shortcut and fulfill God's call without receiving God's nourishment. And disaster lies down this road. We've all been there, right? I mean, all of us have been there where we have been trying and we've been busy and we've been going to serve, to do this, to take care of our kids, and we are realizing we have not nourished ourselves, we have not Sabbathed and taken a day for our souls. And it is a disaster lies down that road. There's a Christian evangelist who's known for saying that God gave me a message and a horse to carry that message, but I have beaten the horse to death, and now I can no longer carry the message, right? We can have a message and a really good one, but never Sabbath, never rest, never care for our souls, allow the gardener to prune and to water, and by the time we've beaten our souls and our bodies, we can't even carry the message any longer. So we're going to continue in John chapter 15, if you have your Bibles, if you want to turn there. Starting again, just to start over in verse 1, it says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because the word I have spoken to you, so remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into a fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. As my Father has loved me, so have I loved you. So remain in my love. So this morning, I just want to talk simply about what is the role of branches. The role is to stay connected to the vine. Remain in me. It's pretty clear. The goal is to remain attached to Christ, to remain in him. And I love it because we remain what? In his love. This is an active remaining, an abiding, an active abiding of receiving and trusting all that God has for us through Christ, receiving and trusting his love. If a branch remains and abides attached, right, it receives all that the vine has to give the branch, all the nourishment. If you stay attached, receiving Christ, welcoming him, trusting him, it's as if we're drinking and eating and savoring the nourishment. We are literally living off the nourishment of Christ. John 6:35, it says this, when Jesus declared, I am the bread of life, whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. This active nourishment from Christ, connecting to Jesus so that all God is can flow through Christ into our lives. Abiding is this believing, trusting, receiving nourishment from the vine. And what is the nourishment, right, that flows between the vine and the branch? We've already said it. In John 15:9, it says it beautifully. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. So remain in my love. The nourishment is love. When we stay connected to the vine, we are nourished with love. A love that produces a fruit. And I think when we read this passage, especially in our American mind, we read this and we're like, okay, so if I remain attached to the vine, I am going to produce a lot of fruit, which means I'm going to have a lot of influence. Our church is going to grow really big. We're going to, like all these like produce metaphors like people, numbers, money. But if we stay connected to love, the fruit of the Spirit is what? Peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. We become a people that know that we are loved. And I think about my kids, man, when my children feel loved and when they don't feel loved, there's a drastic difference, right? When my children are feeling really loved and more secure, they're more peaceful, more patient, they're more kind. But we have to actively remain. I feel like one of the most difficult things for us to do is to trust his love, to just stay connected to the fact that he loves us, that he cares for us. He adores us, right? When we don't have to earn or prove or be enough or be worthy, we can just stay connected and receive the fact that he loves us. To be a recipient of love is actually very difficult. I mean, you want to make me awkward. I'm sure some of you have done this because you're all kind, but I will be most awkward if you ever give me a gift and have me open it in front of you. I hate it. I hate it. Like, even if I like the gift, it seems like I don't because it's just like, oh my gosh, now I have to perform because you are staring at me while I open your gift. Like, I don't know what to do. I won't do it. I'll be like, I'll open it later. Thank you. Right? Because it's difficult to receive. It's difficult to be the one actually needing to receive. Man, I love giving gifts because that puts me in control. Like, I have something to offer you. But to receive is a whole different thing. Understanding that our might, our good works, our righteousness, I think Paul says it right, it's all but weakness. We need to be recipients of love. Trusting that we don't have to feed ourselves, that we can be nourished from a vine. When we moved back to California from Oklahoma where we were pastoring, I remember on the drive here, COVID was like starting to like hit. You know, when you'd like see people with like a mask on and you're like, what are they doing? Or, you know, we had no idea. I remember people coughing at the pharmacy and being like, what's, but you don't know. It was a whole different world. But we moved back, and then weeks within us being here, everything was in lockdown. I was so stressed. We had a newborn baby, like 8 weeks old or something. We were exhausted. And then we moved again to a new house. And then we became pastors of this church the second week it opened from COVID. And I remember sitting in this recliner with now my almost 1-year-old at that point, thinking, I'm like, this is not good. Life is not good. I remember like sobbing. But I very remember in this moment of rocking him, of nourishing him as I fed him, and weeping, that Christ so like seamlessly spoke to me, let me hold you. As you hold and nourish this baby, let me hold and nourish you. But I remember feeling so stiff in this chair, like just so stiff that like I kept like trying to get my body to like relax and like lay back in the arms of God, lay back in this chair. But I was so clenched because there was so much that we needed to care for. So much I had responsibility over. So much I felt I had to do to take care of this baby, to take care of my other son, to take care of this church, all the division that was in the world. It literally, I remember feeling almost like a trust fall to just be like, okay, God, you can care for me. I won't care for myself. I'll let you care for me. But it's interesting how it's so hard sometimes to unclench our fist and allow ourselves to relax in him, that he can nourish us. We don't have to always be caring for others. We can allow ourselves to be cared for, to be nourished. Andrina Sawyer, she says, at the end of constantly feeling the need to prove something is usually where we find our greatest freedom. Man, there's something so freeing about just laying back in the recliner and trusting that, like, as I feed this baby, that God's going to take care of us. That it's not on my shoulders to keep the world afloat. Something so freeing about being a recipient of love, of receiving the nourishment that comes from unconditional love and abiding there, making our home there. And I love it because there's always an invitation to that rocking chair. There's always an invitation to that place. Even the days of pruning are invitations to be found in his love. I think about the times I felt really pruned by the Lord. It was always an invitation back to unconditional love, that we can be cut back and still produce fruit. In fact, we must be. We just went to a conference, and there was somebody who was speaking at one of the sessions, and she's from DC, where there's all the beautiful cherry blossoms at a certain time of year. But she was talking about how her favorite time of the year is actually right before they start to bloom, when you begin to see just the buds on the tree, because it's a reminder to her that before it even blooms, everything that it needs is still there in that branch. Man, when there are seasons that are like, man, this feels like pruning, or I'm not blooming, like this is not the most fruitful seeming season, it's so interesting to me that everything is still there in that branch. The nourishment, the connection to the vine. Seasons of pruning are slow and require a stopping, sometimes feel like we're going backwards, but even that is loving. When we get to step away, step back, it keeps us from becoming consumers, right? We have to produce a fruit in us. Vincent de Paul, he says that the one who hurries delays the things of God. I love this because the more we hurry, the more we actually delay the slowness of God that produces a fruit. Our God is a kind gardener, right? He tends to us. It's a slow process. And he's constantly inviting us back into his love. Where maybe things have run wild in our life, things might be overgrowing in our life, there's a constant invitation to come back and to sit back and allow him to tend to our souls. So we're just going to look at the life of Peter because, look, I relate to Peter. You know how I think all of us have these people in the Bible that were like, I get you. Like Peter is that for me. Peter's kind of this dude who like kind of talks before he thinks sometimes. He's probably in my mind a verbal processor. And so there's backing up of, oh, I just did this. You know, there's a lot of Peter. He's like this scared person, but also he's brave. He's like confident and he's sensitive. It's like this like, Peter, what are you doing? But Peter, man, you so love the Lord. And so I love this, and looking at his life, Jesus, at this point where we're going to pick up in Luke 22, if you want to turn there, Jesus has basically just told people, hey, someone's going to betray me and someone's going to deny me. And Jesus is starting his path to the cross. So we're going to pick up in Luke 22, verse 54. We're going to read quite a bit of this and just kind of look at some of Peter's life when it relates to Jesus. It says this, then seizing him, Jesus, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. I love this. As Jesus has been being taken, Peter just like following from a distance. And when someone there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him there in the firelight, and she looked closely at him and said, this man was with him. Essentially, this girl's just like, hey, this guy was with Jesus. But he denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them. Man, I'm not, Peter replied. And then about an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, for he's a Galilean. Peter replied, man, I don't know what you are talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Man, I can only imagine that feeling of Peter looking in the eyes of Jesus and remembering as it goes on the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Man, this moment of being like, Jesus, I failed. Whew. Jesus looked straight at him. There was honesty and transparency, right? The kind that reveals. The kind that like severs relationship. You've been unjustly taken, and now I'm disowning you. That feeling of like, man, you, my friend, are in the worst situation of your life, and I've actually distanced myself from you because I don't want to be in that. But being looked at and seen in that moment. And then we're going to pick up in John 21. This is after Jesus has died and he has resurrected, and now he's visiting his disciples in a resurrected body. In John 21, this is when he meets up with Peter. After Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee, it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and the 2 disciples were together. I'm going to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. And he said, throw your net to the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard this, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, but even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dare ask, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. I love this. We see Peter jumping in the water at the sight of Christ. And then they share a meal, and nothing is said, right? It's like that time when you're sitting with your friend, you know you've done something, and like no one's talking about it. No one's like, they shared a meal. And then it goes on and says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Look, there's so much we could focus on in all of these passages, but I just want to make it clear and easy this morning that Jesus was once again offering an invitation back into love, into connection. I can only imagine Peter when he jumped in that water at the sight of Jesus, wondering on that swim how he might be received. Man, I just looked this person in the face and betrayed them. And now he's risen, so we know he's God, and oh my gosh, where do I stand then? Swimming to him, only to be met with a meal, his sin not brought up, and then sitting before a resurrected Messiah, being invited back into love. Do you love me? Scott Erickson, he says this, I love this. It says, "It's my belief that the goal of your spiritual journey is to become a whole person, not a better person. If you think the goal is to be better, it won't work. You can run over the hanky treadmill of earning love all you want. You'll never be good enough for yourself. But if your goal is to be whole, you can welcome the hidden side in right now. Wholeness is realizing everything is already in the light of love." Peter wasn't invited into a restored relationship with the risen one because he was no longer going to do any humiliating, embarrassing, or shameful things for the rest of his life. He wasn't asked to help lead a new community of faith because he finally stopped making mistakes. Peter was chosen to do all these things because he was the one who experienced his whole self. The public outside and the hidden inside was received in love. And he was asked if he, with his whole self, would love back. Man, I love this because I think we often think what qualifies us is being good. We want leaders that are perfect. We want to be perfect. But what qualified Peter was all of him being seen by Jesus. You've looked me in the eye as I betrayed you. You're sitting here with me. You know me. And I love it because at the end, what does he say? You know me. You know that I love you. You know me. His whole self connected to the vine. It's in this unconditional love that we will be nourished. And I love it because it's in that unconditional love, if we can connect to that, we can be nourished enough to begin to feed others, as he calls Peter to feed my sheep. We must stay connected, though, to Christ, which is the image of this unconditional, never-ending love. Even in seasons of drought, when it feels like maybe we are being pruned, right? Maybe nourishment isn't tangible. If the worship team wants to come back up as we close, Isaiah 58, I love this. In verse 11, it says, "The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail." And I just want to mention as we close, the drought happens. Like even in this passage, it's like the Lord will satisfy your soul in drought. Drought will happen. When we are talking about staying connected, we are not talking about feeling good. We are talking about staying connected in all seasons to a love that you have to put your faith in, that even though I don't feel it, I believe he loves me. I'm staying connected to love, that I am loved, that I am cared for, that I am seen. No matter how I behave or what I do, I am loved. Because seasons change. Drought happens to us all. One of my friends who's a therapist, she always says to me, don't invite and help people not to invite trauma to their table, because trauma will sit at all of our tables. Trauma will someday sit at your table. It has sat at your table. It will sit at my table. But we don't always have to be inviting it, but we are guaranteed there will be moments when drought sits at our table. But we must stay connected to the water. I think about cactus, which I hate. But, whatever, it's fine. We'll use it for this illustration. But they actually, some of them have roots that grow so deep underground, several times the length of the plant's height above ground, because it has to tap into the water that is so deep in the ground. Sometimes I feel like it feels like this, right? To stay connected, it's like I am like going deep through some tough ground to find this source of nourishment. Because God, where are you? But I will go deep. When we moved to Oklahoma, I went through a very difficult health battle, pretty immediately. We were senior pastoring a church. I was constantly in and out of the ER. I had heart monitors. My body would just go numb at certain times. At one point, they thought I was having a stroke. And I remember asking the nurse, "Am I dying? I have a 2-year-old, I can't die." And she looks at me and she said, "You're alive right now." And I'm like, I'm dying. These moments, and I have so many moments of crying in our bathroom floor, being like, I do not feel the Lord. No feelings, zero, zilch. Don't feel him. I feel abandoned. I'm out here in this state where I don't know anyone. I feel like I've been dropped off in the desert. And all I could do, then I began seeing a psychiatrist. I ended up being evaluated at one point because it's like, what is happening with my body and my mind? And I remember a psychiatrist saying to me, if you just have to quote scripture over and over, do it. And so every night, as I would try to go to sleep, I would say over and over, Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. Over and over and over again, I would say that. I felt none of it. I never felt my soul being refreshed. I never felt his presence come over me. But every night, over hundreds of times, I would say this over and over and over again. This picture of me digging deep into the ground, clinging to stay connected to the source of water, no matter what. Look, the goal was not to be an amazing pastor. Our church was probably like, where is this girl? She's MIA, which they knew what was going on. I talked very openly about it, but the world seemed to be rushing by me. People were performing, things were growing, and I was just trying to stay alive for my 2-year-old. I was just trying to figure out how to not die to get to the ERs in time. Trying to figure out my mental health and what in the world, why was my mind and body rejecting me and betraying me? All my goal was stay connected. Psalms 23, say it over and over and over and over again. But now, in hindsight, having come through it, I look at those moments of laying in bed saying Psalms 23, of crying in a bathroom while the rest of my house was sleeping. The moments of complete and utter drought. I look at those moments and now can clearly see that they were holy moments. Moments where I was being pruned and tended to and nourished even though I did not feel it. Because it produced a fruit. I'll never forget the moment I sat in like a psychiatric kind of like ward. I don't know, I'd never been to something like this. And I was having an evaluation done and looking around at these people, and me and my husband were like holding hands. And I remember being like, every single person's alone except me. And in that moment, I said, and I knew in my mind, I will become a therapist because I will sit here with these people. If we can only stay connected, fruit will be produced. But it's not always easy to stay connected. It's not always easy to believe we're loved. When I think about Peter looking Jesus in the eyes, being very clear that he knows my weakness. He saw my worst. Seeing Jesus being hauled away to be beaten and murdered, and knowing your last sight of him was that you distanced yourself from him. But then Peter swimming to Jesus, a resurrected Jesus, being found in his love, his resurrection, his whole self received in love, and being told by Jesus, you are not too broken. What does he say to Peter? He says, in fact, you are Peter, a rock, and I will build my church. Peter was actually qualified because of all of this to produce a fruit. But only the nourishment that Christ offers us of unconditional love was enough to sustain Peter to swim, to believe that he could jump in the water and go to this person who he had just betrayed. The nourishment of unconditional love of Christ is what helped Peter be a pillar of the church. So today, I just want to practice us actively abiding. I know many of us have kids. We have aging parents we're caring for. We have grief, worries, and stress. And so for the next few minutes, the worship team is just going to sing a song over us. And would we practice actively abiding? Simply connecting to unconditional love that is offered to us. And letting this song be sang over us, letting Jesus connect. Maybe some of us need to jump in that water and start swimming. And trusting that when I get to the shore, I'm going to be met with love, even though I did these things. That our whole self can be seen and known, and we are not disqualified. So let's pray, and then the worship team is going to sing a song, and we can just sit back and rest. Maybe some of us need to let go of our grip, like I constantly do, of feeding and nourishing everyone else, and just free fall back a little bit into a recliner and let God be that for us to catch us. I promise the world will not shatter in the next minute. Your kids are cared for in the children's ministry. You can sit back. So God, we thank you that we can be your kids.